Welcome back to The Explainer. We're diving into a question today that feels like it should have a super simple answer. If a government is drowning in debt, why can't it just, print more money? It's this tempting, easy button solution, but the reality? Oh, it is so much more complicated and honestly way more interesting than just firing up a printing press. So let's get into how it really works. So here's the question I bet you've thought about or at least heard thrown around. Why can't the government just print more money to pay off its debts or fund all these new programs? I mean, it sounds so straightforward, right? Well, today we're going to pull back the curtain on that exact idea and see what's really going on behind the scenes. Okay, first things first. Before we can even touch the whole printing money idea, we've got to understand how a government normally pays its bills. Where does the cash in its wallet actually come from in the first place? Well, just like you might have a salary, a government has its regular income streams. The big one, obviously, is taxes. Income tax, corporate tax, the tax on stuff we buy. But that's not all. Money also trickles in from other places, like fines for speeding, fees to get into a national park, profits from companies the state owns, and even from selling off things like land or old government buildings. So that's the money coming in, but the real drama starts when the money going out starts to get much, much bigger. And that's where we meet a term you've definitely heard before, the budget deficit. So what exactly is a budget deficit? It's pretty simple, actually. It's just when a government spends more cash than it takes in over the course of a year. You can think of it like your own budget. If you spend more than you earn, you've got a deficit. Just, on a massive countrywide scale. And this gap, this deficit, is the entire reason a government has to go looking for extra cash. Now, here's the thing. Running a deficit isn't always a catastrophe. Sometimes it's a strategic move. It can be a powerful way to jolt a sluggish economy back to life, or to fund huge, important projects like new highways or hospitals. But, and this is a big but, it's a deal with some serious consequences. Every single dollar you borrow adds to the national debt. That means bigger interest payments later on. And it always, always carries the risk of waking up that sleeping giant we call inflation. So, when the government has this big spending gap, how does it usually fill it? Well, the most common way is by issuing something that's basically a fancy government IOU. And that official IOU, it's called a bond. To cover its deficit, the government borrows money from, well, pretty much everyone, the public, banks, investment funds, by selling them these bonds. It's a simple promise. You give us money today, and we promise to pay you back down the road, plus a little extra for your trouble. That extra, of course, is the interest. And this is how it's all supposed to work in a normal, healthy system. Step 1, the government realizes it needs more cash, so it issues bonds. Step 2, investors, we're talking big banks, the pension fund that manages your retirement, even regular folks, they buy up those bonds. Step 3, the government gets a big injection of cash to spend. And finally, step 4, the government uses its future income to pay back those investors, plus interest. It's a cycle of borrowing and paying back. But what happens when that normal cycle just isn't cutting it? Or what if the economy needs a much, much bigger kickstart? Well, this is where the central bank steps onto the stage. And it's exactly where the whole money printer myth really begins. All right, pay close attention because this is the absolute key to the whole thing. It lays out two actions that on the surface look kind of similar, but are worlds apart. On the left, you've got quantitative easing, QE for short. Think of it like this. The central bank goes out into the open market and starts buying up government bonds that are already out there. The goal here is indirect, right? It's to pump cash into the financial system to get things moving. But on the right, that's the big no-no. Monetizing the debt, this is totally different. This is when the central bank buys brand new bonds directly from the government. See the difference? It's not about stimulating the market anymore. It's about directly bankrolling the government spending. One is a complex policy tool. The other, it's basically giving the government a blank check. A huge, huge difference. So let's look a little closer at QE. This is the tool they pull out when the economy is really weak and when regular interest rates are already basically at zero. By going out and buying all of these bonds on the market, the central bank floods the system with money. This pushes down long-term interest rates, and the hope, the theory, is that this encourages banks to lend more and businesses to invest and grow. So why is the other option, directly monetizing the debt, so taboo? Why is it so dangerous? Well, because it completely shatters the independence of the central bank. A central bank's number one job is supposed to be protecting the value of our money, which means keeping inflation under control. If that bank just becomes the government's personal ATM, that critical mission goes right out the window. And history is littered with examples of where that leads. Hyperinflation, the kind that can absolutely wreck an economy. Okay, enough with the theory. Let's make this real. There is a perfect real-world case study to see all these abstract ideas in action. Japan's massive economic experiment from the last decade, which was famously called Abenomics. Abenomics was built around these so-called three arrows, all aimed at finally breaking Japan out of decades of economic stagnation and deflation. Now, the second and third arrows were all about government spending and big reforms. But it's that first arrow that we're really interested in today, an incredibly aggressive monetary policy. And what did that mean in practice? It meant a program of quantitative easing on a scale nobody had ever seen before. And when I say aggressive, I really mean it. Just look at this chart. It shows the size of the Bank of Japan's balance sheet, that's all the stuff it bought, compared to the size of the entire country's economy. It is staggering. It completely dwarfs what the central banks in Europe and the US were doing over the same period. Japan went all in, big time. But, like any powerful medicine, that massive dose of QE came with some pretty serious side effects. On the one hand, yeah, it did some of what it was supposed to do. It helped fight off deflation, and it sent the stock market soaring. But on the other hand, critics have a lot to point to. It arguably made wealth inequality way worse because the people who already owned stocks and real estate saw their wealth explode. And by keeping borrowing costs so low for so long, it may have created what people call zombie companies. Businesses that should have failed but were kept alive by all that cheap debt, which could really hurt the economy in the long run. So at the end of the day, what this all shows us is this incredibly delicate balancing act. You've got the government on one side, which often needs to spend, and the central bank on the other, trying to manage the whole economy without, accidentally lighting it on fire with inflation. This quote really just sums it all up perfectly. The real process isn't some guy hitting a print money button. It's a two-step dance. First, the government creates debt by issuing bonds. Then, that debt gets turned into new money through the central bank's actions out in the financial markets. And that leaves us with a massive looming question for pretty much every modern economy today. Over the past decade or so, these extraordinary, massive stimulus programs have almost become normal. They're the status quo. So, the question is, what happens next? What's the next move when this becomes your baseline? That's the puzzle that policymakers and economists all over the world are trying to figure out right now. Thanks so much for joining us on The Explainer.